Hello students, this is Tulika Banerjee from Forensic Science Unit, SGTB Khalsa College, University of Delhi, presenting this module on behalf of Professor Nisar Ahmed, Professor PBGM College, Bhopal. I am delighted to present this lecture on individual and society, which is taught in BA second semester. Before we start our chapter with the introduction of this chapter, let's look at the other modules we will study in this chapter. First is the social contract theory, then second we have the organic theory of society, third is the relationship between individual and society, and fourth and lastly is the conclusion. Man is a social animal. He lives in social groups, in communities and in society. Human life and society almost go together. Man cannot live without society. Man is biologically and psychologically equipped to live in groups. In society, society has become an essential condition for human life to arise and to continue. The relationship between individual and society is ultimately one of the profound of all the problems of social philosophy. It is more philosophical rather than sociological because it involves the question of values. Man depends on society. It is the society that an individual is surrounded and encompassed by culture, a societal force. It is in the society again that he has to conform to the norms, occupy statuses and become members of groups. The question of the relationship between the individual and the society is the starting point of many discussions. It is closely connected with the question of the relationship of man and society. There are two main theories regarding the relationship of man and society. They are the social contract theory and the organic theory. In this chapter, we will study these two theories in detail and also we will discuss about the relationship between individual and society. The social contract theory throws light on the origin of the society. According to this theory, all men are born free and equal. Society came into existence because of the agreement entered into by the individuals. The classical representatives of this school of thought are Thomas Hobbes, John Locke and Rousseau. First, we will learn about the opinion of Thomas Hobbes on society. Thomas Hobbes was of opinion that society came into being as a means for the protection of men against the consequences of their own nature. Man, in the state of nature, was in perpetual conflict with his neighbors on account of his essentially selfish nature. The life of man was solitary, poor, nasty, brutish and short. Every man was an enemy to every other man. Hobbes, in his book, that is Leviathan, has made it clear that man found nothing but grief in the company of his fellows. Since the conditions in the state of nature were intolerable and men longed for peace, the people entered into a kind of social contract to ensure for themselves security and certainty of life and property. By mutual agreement, they decided to surrender their natural rights into the hands of a few or one with authority to command. The agreement of each with all and of all with each other. The contract became binding on the whole community as perpetual social bond. Thus, in order to protect himself against the evil consequences of his own nature, man organized himself in society in order to live in peace with all. Now, we will learn about the opinion of John Locke on society. John Locke believed that man in the state of nature was enjoying an ideal liberty free from all sorts of rules and regulations. The state of nature was a state of peace, goodwill, mutual assistance and preservation. But there was no recognized system of law and justice. Hence, his peaceful life was often upset by the corruption and viciousness of degenerate men. The men were forced to live in full of fears and continual dangers. In order to escape from this and to gain certainty and security, men made a contract to enter into civil society or the state. This contract Locke called as social contract. This contract put an end to the state of nature and substituted it by civil society. According to Locke, the social contract later on contributed to the governmental control. The governmental contract was made by the society when it established a government and selected a ruler to remove the inconveniences of ill condition. Rousseau, the French writer of the 18th century, in his famous book, The Social Contract, wrote that man in the state of nature was a noble savage who led a life of primitive simplicity and idyllic happiness. He was independent, contented, self-sufficient, healthy, fearless and good. It was only primitive instinct and sympathy which united him with others. He knew neither right or wrong and was free from all notions of virtue and vice. Man enjoyed a pure, unsophisticated, innocent life of perfect freedom and equality in the state of nature. But these conditions did not last long. Population increased and reason was dawned. Simplicity and idyllic happiness disappeared. Families were established, institution of property emerged, and human equality was ended. Man began to think in terms of mine and yours. When equality and happiness of the early state was lost, war, murder, conflicts became the order of the day. The escape from this was found in the formation of a civil society. Natural freedom gave place to civil freedom by a social contract. As a result of this contract, a multitude of individuals became a collective unity, a civil society. Rousseau said that by virtue of this contract, everyone, while uniting him to all, remains as free as before. There was only one contract which was social as well as political. The individual surrendered himself completely and unconditionally to the will of the body of which he became a member. The body so created was a moral and a collective body, and Rousseau called it the general will. The unique feature of the general will was that it represented collective good as distinguished from the private interests of its members. The theory of social contract has been widely criticized, as historically there is nothing to show that the society has ever been deliberately created as a result of voluntary agreement or contract. Nor can we suppose that man could ever think of entering into a contract with others when he lived under conditions of extreme simplicity, ignorance and even brutality. The theory seemed to be a mere fiction, as a state of nature never existed. This theory is as old as Plato and Aristotle. Plato compared society or state to a magnified human being. He divided society into three classes: the rulers, the warriors, and the artisans, based upon the three faculties of the human soul, that is, wisdom, courage, and desire. Aristotle drew a comparison between the symmetry of the state and symmetry of the body, and firmly held that the individual is an intrinsic part of society. In more recent times, Blanche and Herbert Spencer have worked out to the minutest possible extent the parallelism between an individual organism and a social organism. Blanche went so far as to attribute qualities of sex to the state. The state, according to him, was masculine in character, while the church was feminine. According to Spencer, the state is subject to the same laws of growth and decay to which the human body is. It has its youth, its prime, its old age and death. Like the human organism, it has subsidiary organs also. The workers who farm the soil and the men who work in the mines, factories and workshops are the elementary organs of the society. Murray sums up the points of resemblance between a society and an individual organism noted by Spencer as: the starting as small aggregates both grow in size. As they grow, their initial relative simplicity is replaced by increasing complexity of structure. With increasing differentiation, there comes about an increasing mutual dependence of the component parts. The life and normal functioning of each becomes dependent on the life of the whole. The life of the whole becomes independent with a far more prolonged nature than the life of the component parts. On the basis of the resemblances, Spencer concluded that society is an organism. It is a social organism. The individuals are the limbs of the society and behave as the cells of the body, whose activity and life are meant for the sake of the whole. Just as the limbs separated from the body have no life, similarly individuals separated from society have no life. The next is the criticism. There are, to be sure, significant resemblances between society and an organism, but there are also very significant differences. Herbert Spencer himself took note of these differences, and on their basis he built up his individualistic theory. According to him, the important points of difference between society and an individual organism are: first, a society has no specific form comparable to the body of an individual. Second, the units of a society are not fixed in their respective positions like those of an individual organism. Third, the units of a society are dispersed persons and are not physically contiguous like cells of an individual. Fourth, society has no common sensorium, no central organ of perception and thought as an individual has. Group mind theory. The group mind has been propounded by a number of thinkers including Plato, Hegel, Bosanquet, Otto Guericke, McDougall, Emerson and Wagner and Wundt. Plato called society a mind writ large and divided it into three classes of philosophers: warriors and artisans, based respectively on wisdom, courage and desire. However, this comparison of society with the human mind did not go beyond a metaphor in Plato. Hegel, the German idealist, holds that society is the embodiment of the absolute mind. It represents a phase of the historical world process, universal spirit or absolute idea. The state, which comprises in itself the essential elements of the preceding stages, namely the family and the civil society, is the final dialectical evolution of mind and represents its highest embodiment upon earth. The will of a state is the perfect manifestation of absolute reason. The individual has reality only in so far as he is a member of the state. Apart from it, he is merely an abstraction. He derives all the value and significance and ethical status he possesses from its membership. The state is a higher end than the individual because it is the individual himself objectified and eternalized by the elimination of his merely accidental and ephemeral features and the retention of what is universal in him. Bosanquet, Hegel was followed by T.H. Green, F.H. Bradley and B. Bosanquet in England. According to Bosanquet, the state is the common substance of the minds of all the citizens. A state is not merely some millions of men and women residing in a given territory and subject to a common sovereignty, but is a group of mind. The group of minds becomes a group mind by virtue of the common purpose uniting them. Even though the group mind cannot exist apart from the minds of the individuals, nevertheless it is a reality. The group mind is superior to the minds of the individuals. It is the higher form of psychic life and absorbs the individual mind, from which it differs not only in the richness of content but also in kind. Next, we will talk about McDougall's views. The idea of the group mind found a strong advocate in McDougall. In his book, The Group Mind, published first in the year 1920, he writes, "The aggregate of individual units, which is a society, has a certain individuality, is a true whole which in great measure determines the nature and the whole of activity of its parts. It is an organic whole. The society has a mental life which is not the mere sum of the mental lives of its units, existing as independent units, and a complete knowledge of the units. If and in so far as they could be known as isolated units, would not enable us to deduce the nature of the life of the whole in the way that is implied in Spencer's analogies. Since then, the social aggregate has a collective mental life which is not merely the sum of mental lives of its units, but may be contented that a society not only enjoys a collective mental life, but also has a collective mind, or as some prefer to say, a collective soul." McDougall goes on to say, "The structure and organization of the spirit of the community is in every respect as purely mental or psychical as the structure and organization of the individual mind." In this way, McDougall comes very close to Bosanquet. Both of them suggest that society is not merely a group exhibiting certain traits, characteristics of its members generally, but is itself a mind and a reality. What was the criticism? The group mind theory has been subjected to severe criticism by critics like Professors Hobhouse, Lasky and McLever. That society is something more than a mere aggregate of individuals is conceded by these critics, but that it has a mind or will of its own distinct from the minds and wills of the individuals who constitute it is not conceded by them. The concept of group mind can be used only in a metaphorical, never in a real sense. The only centers of feeling and of activity are the individual cells. In society, these cells are bound together by interrelationships which they themselves create. When we say that our minds are closely identified in the furtherance of a cause, we only use a metaphor indicating that we are jointly cooperating towards that cause. McDougall's identification of the mental system with a mind is not correct. There may be said to exist a group mind, a social mind, a college mind without being attached, however, any mental act to them. Mind may communicate with mind, but one never becomes the other. The coordination or even integration which belongs to the mental acts of various individuals is never the coordination which belongs to the acts of a single individual. Therefore, to ascribe a mind to society and to place it by the side of individual mind fails to do justice to the individuality of the social being. The relationship between individual and society. The theories just presented, as we have seen and discussed, fail to explain adequately the relationship between the individual and society. The social contract theory puts undue emphasis upon the individual, minimizing thereby the value of society, which is said to be a mere instrument devised for the satisfaction of certain human needs. The organic and group mind theories almost entirely discount the role of individual in social life. The relationship between individual and society is not one-sided, as these theories seem to indicate. Man is social by nature. Firstly, man is a social animal by nature. Man's nature is such that he cannot afford to live alone. No human being is known to have normally developed in isolation. McLever has cited 3 cases in which infants were isolated from all social relationships to make experiments about man's social nature. The first case was of Caspar Hauser, who from his childhood until his 17th year was brought up in the woods of Nuremberg. In his case, it was found that at the age of 17, he could hardly walk, had the mind of an infant, and could mutter only a few meaningless phrases. In spite of his subsequent education, he could never make himself a normal man. The second case was of 2 Hindu children who, in the year 1920, were discovered in a wolf den. One of the children died soon after discovery. The other child could walk only on all fours, possessed no language except wolf-like growls. She was shy of human beings and afraid of them. It was only after careful and sympathetic training that she could learn some social habits. The third case was of Anna, an illegitimate American child who had been placed in a room at the age of 6 months and discovered 5 years later. On discovery, it was found that she could not walk or speak and was indifferent to people around her. These cases prove that human being is social by nature. Human nature develops in man only when he lives in society, only when he shares with his fellow beings common life. The children cited in these situations had capacity to learn but failed to develop their human traits in the absence of human contacts. Our second base is necessity makes a man social. Man lives in society because necessity compels him to. Every individual is the offspring of a social relationship established between man and woman. The child is brought up under the care of his parents and learns the lessons of citizenship in their company. He is totally dependent for his survival upon the existence of some sort of society. If the newborn baby does not receive protection and attention by the society, he would not survive even a day. The importance of society for physical and mental development is obvious. No one can become human being unless he lives with human beings. The need for self-preservation, which is felt by every being, makes man a social animal. Therefore, it is not due to his nature alone, but also due to his necessities that man lives in society. Our third base is society determines personality. Lastly, man lives in society for his mental and intellectual development. Society preserves our culture and transmits it to succeeding generations. It both liberates and limits our potentialities as individuals and molds our attitudes, our beliefs, our morals and ideals. The mind of a man without society remains the mind of an infant at the age of adulthood. The cultural heritage directs our personality. Thus, society fulfills not only the physical needs but also determines our mental equipments. It stands beyond doubt that man is a social animal. Opposition between the individual and society may also come from the deterioration of the social system. An individual brought up in political freedom will find the status of slave irksome and repressive. Under compulsion, he may play the role, but he will resent it and come in conflict with the society, producing tensions in him, which in time may release them in sudden and unprecedented acting. On the basis of the discussion that I had, it may be concluded that individual and society are interdependent. The relationship between them is not one-sided, both are essential for the comprehension of either. Neither the individuals belong to society, as cells do not belong to the organism, nor the society is a mere contrivance to satisfy certain human needs. Neither the society itself has a value beyond the service which it renders to its members, nor can the individuals thrive without society. Neither the society is inimical to the development of individuality, nor does it exist in its own right. All discussions about the question, is the individual prior to the society or is the society prior to the individual, is equivalent to the futile debate over the priority of the hen and egg. The fact is that all human beings have been born into and inducted into some sort of society. In the words of McClever, no one can really be an absolute individualist any more than can be an absolute socialist. For the individual and society interact on one another and depend on one another, both sure, come elementary and supplementary to each other. Explaining the relationship between individual and society, McClever observes, society with all the traditions, the institutions, the equipment it provides is a great changeful order of social life, arising from the psychical as well as the physical needs of the individual, an order wherein human beings are born and fulfill themselves with whatever limitations and wherein they transmit to coming generations the requirements of living. We must reject any view of this pattern that sees the relationship between individual and society from merely the one or the other side. Dear students, this brings to the end of today's chapter. I hope you all have gained valuable knowledge on individual and society. Do keep in mind what we discussed today. I'll be back with one more lecture in this series. If you want to learn more and enhance your knowledge, you may log on to our website www.cec.nic.in for MCQ, quizzes, LORs, etc. So students, keep studying hard. Goodbye.